So as a word wizard, it is your job to monitor as you read. What does monitor mean? Well, it means making sure that you understand what's going on. I mean, what's the point in just reading the words and not knowing really what they are telling us? And all readers monitor, clarify. It's important that they monitor or clarify when they read as they come across words that are unfamiliar or new to them. And when I say all readers, I mean all, including myself. So what do we do? Well, ignoring or skipping words is not okay because it will affect our understanding or our comprehension. Let's consider this. We have the ability to choose what we read. And when we choose text, we can determine if a text is too hard, too easy, or just right for us. Here's the thing. I love desserts. They are yummy and delicious, but I know that I can't gobble them up all the time because it's just not what my body needs to grow and be healthy and thrive. And so, just like books, if I choose too easy books, they're like desserts. And so, enjoy desserts, that's great, but we need to keep in mind that our bodies need to thrive and grow. And so, we should be aware of when we're enjoying dessert books and make sure that we balance our reading diet. Just right books are what we can call our dinner books. Just right books should give us some work as readers. They're kind of like a main course or a meal. We need to feed regularly on just right texts to help us grow. Of course, then there are the appetizers. These are the hard books. Sometimes they can be a little too hard for us. They tame our appetite, but we just can't seem to fill up on them. Too hard texts make us really work, and that work can certainly be a good thing. So we need to work towards a balance between our dinners, our desserts, and our appetite type books. So I give you your reading diet. Your dessert books are ones that are they're too easy for you. They're comfortable. I get it. I love my too easy books. These are the books for me that I tend to read over and over again. They're my go-tos when I often want to relax. But when I want to work my mind, that's when I go to my dinner. That's when I'm reading these books that are books I can read on my own and books that just kind of fill me up. Appetizers, then, are the books that I'm going to read where they really make me think. And so in the classroom, we'll work a lot with appetizers. It's my job to push and challenge you as readers, and so that's what we're going to do. And our appetizer type books are where that being a word wizard really comes in. So let's learn more about how we can be word wizards. And so as readers, we need to think about adopting a close reading strategy skill set. Now, close reading means we're just bringing the text and ourselves closer together. When we do this, we're really paying attention to our own thoughts, memories, and experiences as we bring in our own schema or background knowledge and we make connections. As we read, we're not only considering how we interpret something, but also we're thinking about what the author is trying to tell us. When we closely read, it's really about being aware of our thought processes and our understandings. That is, it's paying attention to our metacognition. And so, while it's not practical for us to do this with everything we read, as we're practicing building our thinking skills, we really want to listen to that inner voice in our head, our thinking voice. And this is where making tracks of our thinking or annotating can really be helpful. It's not practical for us to do this with everything we read, but it's a great skill for us to develop, particularly as we explore appetizer type texts. Now, as a reader myself, when I approach an appetizer, I often will read it multiple times. The first time I read it, I'll just think about the author's purpose and the topic overall. Is what I'm reading persuading me in some way, informing me, or is it entertaining me? Often I find that when I'm reading appetizers, for me, I'm usually reading texts that are designed to inform. And so I'll go back and I'll reread particularly specific parts. And this is where I'll really annotate. This is where my big thinking goes on. And then finally, I'll often go back and I'll do some reflecting. This is where I'll start to look for patterns in the text, or I might be thinking about connections within a text or across texts. Now, sometimes when I closely read, I like to think of it as reading through a lens. That is, I'll have a specific focus, just like lenses on glasses help me zoom in to think about specific things. And so, two ways that I really like to closely read are through what I call a character lens. This is when I'm thinking carefully about characters and what's going on. But for our purposes, we're going to explore reading through a word lens. And so a super simple strategy that we can use for close reading involves just a couple simple steps, particularly if you're able to write right on a text. Some tools that I might use are, of course, highlighters, but I'm sure that when I highlight something on the text, I stick to what's most important. I don't want to turn the text into a coloring page. Often, as I find details that help support my thinking, I might star them or perhaps put a little mark by them. Often when I read, I question. And so I might put a question mark by something, or this is where I might simply pop a Post-it note right on and jot my question down. And then finally, when you come to those words that you're unfamiliar with or words that just really stick out to you, I circle them. And so, to help you get a better idea of how I do this as a reader and what kinds of things are appetizers for me, I'm going to share some examples. Smithsonian Magazine really challenges my thinking, as does reading articles in National Geographic. They make me think, and without a doubt, I have a need to figure out what a lot of the tricky words in these articles mean. And so these magazines for me are not things I read often, but they intrigue me, and so I go to them. I'm going to show you how I do it. I have to admit, I'm a fan of images. Images catch my attention and draw me in. And often I find when I read a text, I will look at the images, and then I will often pay attention to the captions. And so this particular image grabbed my attention because it was a cutaway of a brain. And I read the caption, and I had a couple words that really stuck out to me. Here we have a brain, but then we have the words longitude, latitude, and map. And so for me, I'm like, how in the world are these things connected? Because I can see a brain and think of a map, and the two don't seem to go together. And so this prompted me to read the article that went with it. So here was the first page of this article, and it had to do with brain research. Now, I didn't read the whole article because I kind of got bored after a while, because I found that there were just really too many of these domain-specific words. And in this case, the words in this text were really specific to the science field. There are a lot of scientific words. I found that as I was reading, I kind of came up with a little coding system for myself because I found a lot of words that I felt were very rich and descriptive. And so those were the words that I highlighted as I read. But then I came across words that I thought, wow, this doesn't really seem to fit the content. You know, if I'm reading about brain research, I'm reading journeys and tourists and even a guinea pig. And so those were words that at first I thought, they don't fit the meanings that I normally would expect. And then finally, this is where I started to notice my content-specific words. Biochemistry, hippocampus, neurons, radiologist. These are not words that I use every day in my language. That then makes them those domain-specific words. Now, one of the things that I do as a reader when I read through a word lens is I let words help create mental images for me. And the first paragraph alone set the stage. As I read about cascade of files on a computer, sitting in a windowless library but surrounded by boxes of old letters and curling issues of scientific journals. It just really helped me picture sitting in almost like an office of someone who really just likes to read and think and research. As I read on and I read words like journey and tourist, it gave me a sense of how the scientists being interviewed felt. I mean, when you talk about journeying into the brain and visiting spots that tourists would visit, it was just a really interesting figurative way to talk about this research. Now, of course, as I came across a lot of these content-specific words, I started to decide which ones were ones worth looking up, and which ones were ones that I could infer the meaning of. When I read this part about in my brain called the amygdala, I knew that it was an area in the brain. I wasn't really concerned with looking up specifically what it did. But then as I read other parts like cortex and hippocampus, again, I could infer these are just parts of the brain. And so that's one way that I really approach this text as a word wizard and through a word lens. Now, of course, as you're reading, you might find, though, that you get to a point where you have trouble inferring meaning. You're not sure what to do. Make your best guess, and then we know it's time to look them up. We need to use a dictionary. We're using the context, and then we're going to most likely locate it in a digital source. So here's a final example. Remember this text that I read with all these words? These are words that I thought about as I was reading, but to really understand the article, I'm going to need to look up neuroscientific. I'm going to want to look up radiologists. I decided that I didn't need to look up amygdala or hippocampus or cortex, but I think knowing what a neuron is might help. And then I also am curious about biochemistry. So these are words that I'll list, and then I'll go and copy the definitions of. And that's what it takes to build your skills as a word wizard when you read. Now here's another text that I came across in Smithsonian Magazine, and it was talking about reversal, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so I started reading it, and immediately a word lens kicked in. You can see that I started circling all kinds of words here because they were really jumping out to me. Exuberant, wounds, denuded, fertile, annihilated, poisoned. Wow. Got to be a little overwhelming, and you can see that I actually started listing a lot of these. But what I started to notice then was I began to sense a pattern in what I was reading. And that pattern was that these words were words that appealed to my emotions, and they were images, they created images in my head, but they also gave me a little more clarity. Take, for instance, the first sentence. Once great wrongs are done, it's rarely possible to undo them. Wow. So what does that mean? Well, I guess when a mistake is made, maybe he's saying it's rarely possible to undo that mistake. Earth, the most exuberant planet known to exist in any galaxy. Now I can start to infer what some of these mean. Exuberant probably means maybe, let's see, the most exuberant planet in any galaxy. Probably means something great. That's going to be a good word, though, to look up later. Exuberant. But then go on, it says, carries great wounds upon its lovely face. Okay, so Earth having a face, and I know what a wound is. It's like an injury. So the writer is now saying that, wow, Earth has a lovely face. You can say it's a beautiful planet, but it's been hurt. Denuded hills. So if we're talking about wounds, I'm inferring that denuded must mean something negative. Fertile farmlands being washed into the sea. Ooh, that sounds like a negative there too. Turned to dust. Treasure houses of biodiversity annihilated. I know annihilated means like wiped out. Air, land, and water poisoned. And so all of these really gets into not just, the emotion behind what's going on. It's creating an image that Earth's being damaged or hurt. And so now I'm starting to get at what's going on here. He's talking about how we're really hurting our planet, and the things we're doing to it are going to be hard to undo. All of this by reading through a word lens. Now here's the rest of the article, and again, it's filled with all kinds of words that are really helping me think more about what's going on. Look at this one, devastation and extinction. I'll get into something called tone later. Tone is the feeling of the writer, and so I feel like the words that he's using suggests that we have effects of destructive and renewal forces. Again, I read and I just kept detecting these patterns. And so while this is a text that's an appetizer for me, it's a text that I could still read through a word lens and still get a great deal out of. So here I have the first paragraph from this book, Lucy Brandon and the Copper Mine Cache. What I found interesting as I read this text was the use of the language. Check it out. The water of the Chestatee River rippled against the canoe as it made its way downstream. First smoothly, calmly, sweetly, and then the river turned into an excited youngster as rapids rushed the canoe over the gap between the rocks and through the next pass, while water flying in the air like confetti thrown at a birthday party. This is a pretty long and thick sentence here. filled with lots of rich words. The passengers of the canoe were breathless, exhilarated, concentrated, using the paddles to guide their vessel of safety through this untamed, ancient rush to the sea. Wow. Look at this word, exhilarated. If I look at it in context, the passengers of the canoe were breathless, exhilarated. Can I infer what this means? Well, based on everything that I read above, it talks about this river rippling against the canoe. And it's first calm and smooth and sweet, and then the river turns into an excited youngster. And so I'm inferring that exhilarated might mean something like excited. Almost like maybe they're a little bit scared, but scared in a good way. They want to do this. Now, the next word I've got is paddles to guide the vessel of safety. And so I know they're in a canoe on a river, so I can infer that a vessel must mean something like a canoe or maybe a boat. Has to do with something that travels on water or a watercraft. And so as I go through this text and I examine words, I can look at a word in context and I can infer, think about what it means. This is what we do when we practice being a word wizard. And so as we take time to kind of write our thinking out, we're building our skills. So as an opportunity to practice your skills as a word wizard, I'd like to give you the rest of this piece from the Coppermine Cache to go through and read on your own using a word lens. I'm sure you'll find that it's probably an appetizer text for you. Happy reading!